to extraordinary developments that threaten to further divide the Republican Party and impact our democracy. Late Friday, Republican National Committee members voted to censure Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger for their work on the committee investigating the attack on the Capitol and the attempt to overturn election results, saying the two were part of a, quote, Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. The former vice president, Mike Pence, rebuked President Trump's insistence that Pence could have rejected the Electoral College results on January 6th.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Under the Constitution, I had no right to change the outcome of our election.
We begin with Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio. He is in Miami. Senator, we invited you to come on this show to talk about China. I want to get there, but I have to start here. Do you agree with Mike Pence?
Well, if President Trump runs for re-election, I believe he would defeat Joe Biden, and I don't want Kamala Harris to have the power as vice president to overturn that election. And that's the same thing that I concluded back in January of 2021.
So Donald Trump was wrong?
Well, as I said, I just don't think a vice president has that power, because if the vice president has that power, Donald Trump would defeat Joe Biden in 4 years or 2 years, and then Kamala Harris can decide not to overturn the election. I don't want to wind up there.
Right. So, yes. So this appears a turning point for the party, though. Does the RNC speak for you when it says that this is a Democrat-led persecution of ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse? Was January 6th legitimate political discourse?
Well, anybody who committed crimes on January 6th should be prosecuted. If you entered the Capitol and you committed acts of violence and you were there to hurt people, you should be prosecuted, and they are being prosecuted. But the January 6th Commission is not the place to do that. That's what prosecutors are supposed to do. This commission is a partisan scam. They're going after, the purpose of that commission is to try to embarrass and smear and harass as many Republicans as they can get their hands on.
That's what you believe your two Republican colleagues are doing? Liz Cheney
I believe
and
that commission is doing. Well, let me tell you, I know that's what that commission is doing, because they're focused well beyond January 6th. There are people, for example, like an older member of the RNC whose husband just died, and she wasn't even in Washington on January 6th.
But that's not what the censure said.
She signed some papers. She wasn't even in Washington on January 6th. She can't afford to lawyer up, and she's being harassed by this commission. This commission is nothing but a partisan tool designed to go out and smear and attack and get their hands on as many people as they can, including people that weren't in Washington on January 6th.
Okay, sounds like you say they do speak for you. Let's get to China.
Well, I told you where I stand on that commission. I think that commission is a scam. I think it's a complete partisan scam, and I think anyone who committed a crime on January 6th should be prosecuted and, if convicted, put in jail. I do not believe that we need a congressional committee to harass Americans that weren't even in Washington on January 6th. We're not in favor of what happened on that day, have condemned what happened on that day, but they want to smear them anyway. I'm against that, yes.
Sources tell CBS News that Vladimir Putin has assembled about 70% of the forces that he would need for a full invasion of Ukraine. He could take the capital within just 2 days. As many as 5 million refugees would be driven into surrounding countries. He could do all this within 10 to 15 days of where we are right now. What impact do you see this having on the United States?
Well, the impact would begin by destabilizing Europe. This is the single greatest threat Europe has faced since the 1940s. And as you've pointed out, the refugee surge would be one. But I think this would have a global impact, because we're now all of a sudden once again living in a world in which countries and leaders can decide that something belongs to them, and they go in and take it by force. And there are multiple countries in Europe that have complaints about treaties that were signed over 100 years ago in some cases. We know how China claims its claims on Taiwan. It has territorial disputes with India on its borders. So if we now live in a world where you can just go in and take a country because you claim it or parts of it belong to you, and you can do so militarily, well, we've entered a very dangerous period in human history once again. So I think it has enormous consequences if and when that happens.
President Biden has made clear he won't use U.S. combat troops. He will use sanctions, financial warfare. Given how Xi Jinping, the president of China, embraced Russia's President Vladimir Putin just in the past few days, do you see this as a way that these two countries can just blunt the impact of U.S. sanctions?
I want it to be clear, there is no U.S. combat role in Ukraine. There isn't going to be one.
Right.
I don't know of anyone who supports it, not even the Ukrainians. That said, I think that Vladimir Putin has to pay a high price if he does this. Not just for him to pay the price, but for other countries to see the high price of doing that kind of thing, and other leaders. And I think that price should be, A, his economy should be crippled and hurt badly. That will require unity, not just from the Europeans, but other countries around the world, but beginning with the Europeans. If they're not going to impose those sanctions and stick with them, then over time he will be able to blunt it. But the other thing that's going to happen is the easiest part for him is going to be the invasion. The harder part is going to be the occupation. Ukrainians are not going to welcome him with roses. He's going to have to explain to Russian mothers why their sons keep coming home injured, killed, and maimed from this occupation. If any country on earth knows how painful and difficult it is to occupy a country that doesn't want you there for a substantial period of time, it should be us, with our experiences in Iraq and Afghanistan.
As I mentioned, this alliance between Russia and China seems to be building on China itself. More than 1 million mostly Muslim minorities are in detention camps in China. According to the State Department, they're subject to forced sterilization, abortions, rape, torture, forced labor, restrictions on prayer, restrictions on movement. I know you've been working to try to restrict imports made by forced labor inside these camps. But is it really possible to clean up the supply chain? Because China is such an economic behemoth here.
Well, a couple things that we need to do. The first is we need to do this no matter what, because this country has to be a country that makes things again. If we've learned anything over the last couple years is that you have to have a manufacturing and industrial capability, and you can't be dependent on foreign supply chains entirely, especially those located in a place like China. Because of a pandemic, a war, or out of leverage against us, you could be cut off and create an economic crisis. But the second is, we've passed that bill. We passed a bill that says if something is made in a factory in that part of China, we are going to presume it's made by slave labor and not allow it into the country unless companies can prove that that's not the case.
Which companies are the worst abusers on this front?
I think there are many American companies like Nike and others that have definitely benefited from the supply chain that's located in that part of the world. And the list could be even more extensive than that, because there are people that are buying from subcontractors. Many of them know they're sourcing material from that area, but they continue to allow it to happen. And so we saw the lobbying efforts of Apple, of Nike, and others just represented through chambers, arguing that this would raise the cost for consumers, but ultimately it's slave labor. And it's a horrific genocide.
Well, and Tesla just opened a showroom in the province where these camps are located. I mean, American businesses still seem to be more than willing to try to tap the Chinese market.
Well, it's one of the largest markets, the second largest market in the world, and in some industries the largest. I understand the profit motive behind it, and that's fine, but I understand that with their view of it, that's their agenda. But our agenda has to be the national interest of the United States, not to mention what's right or wrong in the world.
I want to ask you about what's happening on U.S. soil. The FBI director, Chris Wray, gave a pretty extraordinary speech last week saying China and its threat here in the United States is greater than it's ever been before. He said China is actually targeting people inside the U.S. Listen to this.
We're seeing the Chinese government resort to blackmail, threats of violence, stalking, and kidnappings. They've actually engaged criminal organizations in the U.S., offering them bounties in hopes of successfully taking targets back to China.
How do you combat that kind of espionage on U.S. soil without the United States itself becoming a surveillance state?
Well, it's difficult. It's not easy, and it's a new threat that we face. But what he's pointing to there is the example of a Uyghur. Let's say there's a Uyghur in the United States who's involved in speaking out against those abuses that are going on in China. They are trying to lure those people to come back to China. And the way they do it is they threaten their family over there, but they might even align themselves with some sort of a triad group or some street gang of that nature in order to go and personally try to intimidate these people. They have sent people to this country to do that sort of thing as well, to harass and intimidate, whether it's the Uyghur issue or general political topics as well. If you're speaking out against China and you're a Chinese national or former Chinese national, you have families back over there, they try to harass you through your family over there and increasingly directly here. And so I think the first step is to sort of reveal it and call it out and do it what the director just did. I think the second step is to expel these people. Once we've identified that some agent of influence from China is on U.S. soil, going after people living in this country and trying to intimidate them, those people should be immediately expelled from the country, even if they're here under diplomatic cover, or in many cases, they're here under business cover.
But is enough being done on this front?
Well, I think there's now a growing awareness on this. This is a new thing that's emerged over the last few years as they've become more and more aggressive about it. So it remains to be seen. I mean, we've got to do more, and I think more needs to be done at the local level. Look, if you go into a local police department in this country and you tell them there's a Chinese agent operating in your community, that's something they've never dealt with before. I don't think there's a lack of willingness to address it. I just think it's something that we don't have a lot of experience addressing it. But we have to, because it's happening and it's real, and every year it gets worse.
And can you do it without impacting the rights of Chinese Americans or Chinese nationals who are living here?
Yeah, in fact, it's Chinese nationals living here that are being threatened and intimidated. And one of the great threats that exists there is many of them are hesitant to come forward and report what's happening to them to the authorities because they're specifically told not to do so or their family are going to be harmed. So I think we've got to develop greater trust.
All right. Senator Rubio, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Thank you.